Oh my gosh, yes. Let's talk about how all the highways in California are bordered by an incredibly toxic and poisonous plant. Let's talk about the oleander. So, oleanders, if you've ever driven down a California highway and you see a tall, leafy shrub with dark green, pointy leaves and these big white or pink flowers, that is an oleander. It's very common and very popular in California landscaping because it is drought tolerant. It needs almost no water, and it is very tolerant of poor soil. So you don't have to do a whole lot of soil amendment to plant an oleander. It grows quickly, it grows really tall. So it's very popular along highways because, again, that soil is pretty poor and nobody's going to be going along highways watering plants. It's going to have to depend on the rainfall, which in California varies a lot. And so it was very popular as an ornamental shrub along the highways in California to add a little greenery, a little color. It's a very pretty plant, so it's understandable why people would want to plant it. So what's the downside? So the downside of oleander is that it is incredibly poisonous. Just a tiny piece of a leaf would kill a full-grown adult. And every part of the plant is toxic. The flowers, the stems, the wood, the leaves, all of it, incredibly toxic. It is toxic to people. It is also toxic to pets. So it's toxic to dogs, cats, pretty much anything alive would get sick and die from eating oleander. But most especially, I find it really terrifying, this idea that there's these incredibly poisonous plants that are in people's backyards that they might not know about, that children could maybe put in their mouth or a pet could ingest accidentally. Now, all that said, I did look into this, and the one statistic I could find was that between 1995 and 2005, there were 3 recorded cases of oleander poisoning in California, which I think is a relatively small number considering how much oleander we have everywhere. And I also don't know if those poisonings were deliberate for some reason, either by the person or by another person, or if they were accidental. So we don't know exactly how those poisonings happened. But that doesn't take into account the many pets that could have been poisoned, and maybe we didn't know that that's what happened, or it just wasn't recorded. Couldn't find a statistic about the pets that might have been unalived by this poisonous plant. So considering how common, how ubiquitous this shrub is and was, it doesn't sound like people are ingesting it in any great numbers. I think having 3 people pass away from oleander poisoning is too many, but considering how many oleanders there are and were in the landscape, I think it's a relatively low number. And the point that the commenter makes, which I think is really important, is that even though people aren't necessarily ingesting oleander in great numbers, when oleander burns, all that toxicity just gets aerosolized. So it's very toxic to be around if it's burning. I think in general, if you're in a wildfire and the oleanders are burning, you're probably at a point in the wildfire when humans have evacuated. And so maybe there aren't humans around to breathe in that aerosolized poison for the most part. But what about firefighters? If firefighters are on the front line, there's a bunch of burning oleander, are those gas masks that they're wearing going to be sufficient to keep them safe from that toxicity? I'm not sure. It's very dangerous. It seems to me, considering how many native plants we have in California that are drought resistant, that are fire resistant, that are tolerant of poor soils, all the things that people seek out in oleander, why wouldn't you just use a native plant? Even if it grows a little more slowly, something that is native to the landscape, has all those same properties that you're looking for, but isn't incredibly toxic. But what's interesting to note about oleanders today in 2024 is that they have started to come down with leaf disease, a leaf blight that is killing oleanders in great numbers in Southern California. It's actually passed by an insect, passed from oleander to oleander, very deadly, and there is no cure for it. So it may be that in the coming decades we will see less of the oleanders because they are subject to this disease, because we overplanted them. And so hopefully they will be replaced by something native, something just as pretty, and something that does not give me anxiety every time I see it because it is so poisonous.